center, where the hospital could do a large number of vaccinations. And our first lot or allocation was approximately 5,000 vaccines that we had to do in a 2-week period of time. And because it's the first time that we had a drive like this, we decided that we would like to do it at 2 different venues. But as time went by, let me first say that, whenever you create a vaccination center like that, there's certain things that you need to abide by. So the one thing was we had to look at social distancing. The next thing is we had to ensure that we could have our patients and our vaccines close by, but also taking into account that we have to have an emergency center close by for in case something went wrong. And then lastly, we also had to ensure that there's enough space for the vaccinees to be able to recuperate that or to have that 15 minutes after the fact. So we decided that we are going to do it at 2 different venues at the hospital. But as I've said, as time go by, we discovered that we had to change some things to the venue because of system requirements. So we had to ensure that we have some Wi-Fi available because of the electronic EVDS system that the National Department of Health created, and where vaccinees had to be registered on, but where the vaccines also, as they were dished out to the vaccinees, had to be registered on. And we also had to ensure that there's a manual backup system because, as you know, computer systems is not always available. So the National Department of Health actually created this manual form. And I must say that in the first few days of our vaccination drive, we made use of the manual forms. And the reason for that was that there were many of the vaccinators who arrived at the vaccination venue that didn't have a login. Now, that created a lot of problems. And I think the main reason for that was when the vaccinators started their training, I don't think that the system has been developed to indicate to them that they actually also need to capture information on the EVDS system. And whenever you've asked vaccinators, are you registered? They presume that, meaning, did you do the course and did you get the accreditation and so forth? They were not aware of the fact that they had to get a login and a password to be able to access the system. So, like everything, whenever something like this need to come together, there's a lot of different things that need to happen, and this in the end ends up in teamwork. So the asset management team in my department had to ensure that there's enough assets available, that all the relevant assets are there, and that is from chairs to tables for the vaccinators. My information management unit had to ensure that we had enough computers, and then my admin staff had to make sure that they know exactly how the admin portion of the EVDS system work, and then also other support people that were part of the whole drive, and that is like queue marshals, the cleaners, the security guards, the observers, that is going to observe the vaccinees afterwards, as well as the screeners. So if you look at the Grooteskier, I did see that you draw a little picture at the beginning of how it looks at Tygerberg. So this is how it looks at Grooteskier. At Grooteskier, we've got a queue that is outside. That will go to a screening area where the people are being screened, asking, the various questions. Do you have a sore throat today? Just to make sure that that people might not have COVID. or has got some COVID symptoms, then in the beginning, as I've said, we did use the manual route because of the fact that we were not sure that that our systems were up and running and everybody were registered. So we had them to complete the manual forms, and from there they went to the admin department. And I'll show you some pictures later on of how it looks at our centrum. And the vaccinee information is being checked. Now, unfortunately, when you register on the EVDS site to get a vaccine, there's certain things that you need to complete. But as soon as you get to the admin section of the EVDS vaccine section, some of the questions aren't being answered, like, for instance, marital status. So in the original registration, they don't ask you for that, but that is a field that has to be completed. Your medical aid and your medical aid number. Some people did put in that they belong to a medical aid, but because they didn't have the number, they just left that blank. Their language as well as their home address. So all of that information need to be captured by the admin department. And from there, the vaccinees went out of the admin department and they went via the research area. That is where our research team or the Sazonki team actually did all their work after the vaccines has been brought down from the old main building. And then they went to a pre-waiting area where they had to sit and wait for the different vaccine booths. Now, to open. Now, we had altogether 18 stations.
Annelies?
Yes?
Sorry, Annelies, can I just point out you have a couple of minutes left?
Oh, okay. So, okay, from there onwards, they went to the different vaccine stations, and then in the end, they went to the post-waiting area before they exit the system. Now, here is a picture of how it looks in front of the area. We used our coronavirus testing center to do this. Here is inside one of my security guards and the screening area. There is where the people could sit and fill in their forms while we were still form-based. And this is the admin section where we had altogether 7 booths where we could handle the admin. There you can see the inside. There you can see the researchers area where they sit, as well as a portion of the pre-waiting area. This is our pre-waiting area, and this is our vaccination station. So at each vaccination station, we had a table for the vaccinator as well as for their administrator. So we decided that we're going to provide each one of the vaccinators with an administrator that could do the capturing on the system. This is our emergency area that we've created, and here is the post-waiting area. Now, the problems that we have encountered is the long queues that originated. A lot of staff that pitched without a voucher code. We had priority lists of high-risk employees that were to be treated first of all. And we had a lot of problems of people believing that they should have been on the list and that were not on the list. And then there was a lot of shouting that happened to the poor people who tried to organize the queues outside.
Annelies, sorry, can I ask you to finish off quickly? I'm sorry to hassle you, but we are short of time.
Okay, so I can stop here.
Okay, and we can pick this up at question time. Okay, thank you. I will show my screen very briefly. If I can, there we go. So, so now we have Garth Hanke. Annelies, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you. Garth Hanke was very much involved in the training required to set up the center. And you will see that he's the process improvement coordinator at Grootskeer Hospital and a lean practitioner. Thanks, Garth. Over to you.
Hi, good day, Norman. Can you hear me?
Yep, can indeed.
Okay.
Good to see you.
So we fought to get information from the executives and the management down to the operational teams. We did it in AstraZeneca, but we only gained traction when the Johnson & Johnson rollout was quite close by, and we developed some content. So the management of the hospital were confronted with lots of information, policies, head office, providing them on the hour different information, and that informed their planning, but none of that information was translated to the operational staff of the hospital. And that Sunday evening, when the minister made that announcement that we're not going to use the AstraZeneca, that's when we had a big problem, because now everybody was confronted, what is going on? And eventually the Johnson & Johnson came in as a trial. And then Professor Hassan Mohammed at provincial level had his COVID-19 vaccine information sessions, and our team was also in the sessions, and we observed that what he covered in his presentations, the people didn't actually listen because of the anxiety and fear. They actually asked the same questions afterwards because they needed that human-to-human touch. That's when we decided we need to enroll an education program on the vaccine rollout for the staff of the hospital. So we booked the venue, but we were confronted with social distancing. So we could only manage to get about 50 people per time in the venue, but we had 4 slots per day. We had 8 till 9 in the morning, 12 till 1 in the afternoon, 3 till 4 in the afternoon, and 8 till 9 at night as well to cover the evening staff. So the morning that we rolled out the vaccine was when my team had a quick meeting. When are we going to start rolling out the education program? And we decided at 12 o'clock that day. So as the vaccine was rolled out, we informed the people. We collaborated with Professor Graham Meintjes, who did 5 videos for us. 2-minute videos answering the basic questions that people had, like, what is the vaccine all about? Is it safe? And what are the side effects? And how was it developed so quickly? And how can we access reliable information? And then we first play the information videos to the people, but afterwards, we actually explained the process, because that's what also the people did not understand. Like Annalise alluded to, there was an electronic system and a manual system, and you needed to present your green ID book or your license to verify that you actually are there. You need to be on the categorization list at grootte skeer, internal list, to present yourself at the vaccine, because if you're not on that list, you're not going to be vaccinated, because we only have a number of vaccines per day. We informed them when you come to the site, how the process works, and basically open the floor for some questions. And this was quite interesting, the type of questions that were asked. But we quickly collaborated with one of our anesthetists to answer some of the medically indicated questions that we as non-medical people couldn't answer. But the people started to make more comments than answer more questions. So one of the biggest or the examples that touched us the most was the ICU nurse that actually said, she asked the people that woke up from COVID in ICU, if there was a venue, a vaccine available, would you have taken it? And all of them indicated yes. There was one of our own senior sisters that say, I'm not anti-vaccine, but I have so much allergies, I'm not comfortable taking the vaccine. And she couldn't even take a Panado without any side effects. And after the 3rd session that she joined, she actually said, okay, team, I must make a confession. I'm convinced, and if you guys are going to be there on the day that I'm going to be vaccinated, I'm going to take it. And that was a breakthrough moment for us. And then it also got very emotional. Among from the rumors and the stuff that we answered, this one nurse actually lost a mother, and she said, our colleagues, our mothers, our brothers, our fathers that we lost would be here today if the vaccine was available 6 months ago. And that made the people actually realize the importance of a vaccine. And as we answered the process and the medical questions, we identified that we're actually fighting against social media and the misinformation out there. So we developed...
sorry, can I just remind you, you've got a couple of minutes.
Okay, I need 1 more minute. So we actually had a little questionnaire to get what the mindset was before the education session. and what the mindset was afterwards. So very quickly, the stats showed that the people that was pro-vaccine was about 59%. And after the session, it increased to 78%. The people that were unsure about getting the vaccine was 32%, and that decreased to 16%, which is a 50% drop. And out of this whole ordeal, we stopped the education program because we saw less and less people coming because the information was spreading by word of mouth. But the human-human connection was vitally important to make people realize what the vaccine is about, the program is about, and for the greater good of the people, what is the cause we're there for. So I can maybe stop there, Norman.
Oh, thanks very much. That's a super job.
Yeah.
God, thanks very much. Catherine Orrell, Associate Professor at the Health Sciences at UCT and heavily involved in HIV research through the Desmond Tutu Foundation, will tell us about her experience of running and involving her staff and herself in the vaccination center at Groote Schuur. Thanks, Catherine.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. So Anneline's picture was a lot fancier than mine. Here's mine of the vaccine center. But basically our role as the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation was to deliver vaccine to the vaccine center. So we're a research site. We first heard about this research project as a phase 3B research project on the 7th of February, and we delivered our first doses on the 17th of February. So we all, Groote Schuur and DTHF teams, moved really fast in a really short period of time to get this whole thing together. Annelies spoke to this. We took us a while and through a lot of meetings and communication to define our roles. And fortunately, the research role was not that of deciding who was coming to get the vaccine, but in fact, getting the vaccine to people. We have 3 pharmacists in our research site. However, to produce the number of vaccines we need per day at the vaccine center to use these 5,000 that we were required to produce in 2 weeks, we had to have 8 people, eight pharmacists on site. So our pharmacy has been very stretched. We've had to call on multiple volunteers for support. We have come out as a rough estimate. Some people draw up at different doses. It's a very fiddly vaccine to draw up. A pharmacist can draw up 10 to 12 doses per hour. We have had to call on broader teams as well because there are a number of extra activities, such as a Department of Health inspection that's happened to our pharmacy. We've had visits from ministers. We've had volunteers come and do time and motion studies, and we simply didn't have the capacity to stretch my team thinner than this because this is all happening on top of my normal TB HIV research work that is still happening up at Groote Schuur. So we're doing this, we're producing 800 vaccines a day in addition. That has required our pharmacy team and also other staff to run the vaccine from the J52 Groote Schuur pharmacy down to the vaccine center. At that point of time, vaccine is still under sort of our research protocol and has to be maintained under cold chain and on a chain of custody log by my team. And then at the research center place where we have a little desk where Annelies also had it here as a research section, that is where we complete our chain of custody logs, check the temperatures, and then we have a team that does not necessarily required to be a research person, but anybody who then hands the vaccine over to each of the vaccinators in exchange for a voucher number. So when we do a straight swap. This is needed buy-in from my whole team. We're a team of 30 and about 10 of us have been sort of subsumed in Sisonke every day since it began. So it has required a lot of effort and input from my research team and also the broader foundation. We've been bringing in people in from Amasi Phumelele sites and Nyanga sites and other places just so that we can keep everything going. One of the other key things to keep going is the stock. it has been quite difficult to operationalize with different and changing volumes every day. We haven't known how many people quite a lot of the time are arriving every day. And so we've had to kind of manage as we go. We have a WhatsApp group saying like 50 people left in the queue, don't make more vaccines, because there's only 2 hours between vaccine draw up and use. We really haven't wanted to waste any product, and we haven't to date, but it's required a lot of coordination between the vaccine center and the pharmacy teams to get that right. We've also been keeping track of stock at the end of every day. I don't need to go into the vaccine center. It's well spaced. It allows for social distancing. However, our pharmacy space is extremely limited. They have had to reduce their spacing to less than we're actually comfortable with. We have opened another pharmacy downstairs at the CRC, but that space is limited because of the number of pharmacists required to deliver the vaccines. We did have some redundant activities initially, and Annelise spoke to this. For a while, we used both the paper EVDS form as well as the live EVDS system, but that has now fallen away. And for our research team, we may not actually need to swap the vaccine for a voucher number, but because the EVDS system is new for us and we have to have some accountability as to where those vaccines have gone as researchers, up until now, we have collected that just so that we know that at some point we can go and link to a person that vaccine went in, because we are usually as researchers very well controlled, very monitored. Every activity is checked thoroughly. So and we're not sure quite how the checks and balances are going to work in this very rapidly moving phase 3B program. And we do need to make sure that we have stuck to all our research principles and crossed all our T's and dotted all our I's. We have had some bottlenecks, and it also phases by day. So often in the beginning of the day, the rate of production of vaccine from the pharmacy is slow and the queue is long. And so there we are the rate limiting step as the vaccine production site. There have been points when we've actually saturated the vaccine center. On one of the weekends I was there with the private sector, we had fewer vaccine stations than all 18 open, and we had vaccines to hand. So there were plenty, it was the number of vaccinators that were slowing the process down. And then but we also have had times when we've had rows of vaccine boxes and expiry dates ticking down, and we've had no people to come and get the vaccines. That often happens at lunchtime. There's a kind of lunchtime slump. Just as our pharmacy is building up its numbers, the number where everybody goes to lunch. And so we end up with this imbalance. And we've just managed that through lots and lots of communication. And I know from Annelise's team, we don't want to waste vaccines. So if the people on the list haven't come, they call others to try and make sure we don't waste any product.
Catherine, this is your 1 or 2 minute warning.
So this is my last slide. Tips for new site. Communication is absolutely clear. If other research sites are doing this, don't gatekeep. Leave that to the role of the vaccination center team. Train as many people as you can to draw up vaccine. My team is now exhausted. We have to spread out staff to avoid fatigue. Make sure you have adequately pharmacy space. Just in terms of living in the middle of a pandemic, we do need to still protect our pharmacists even during this rush. Knowing your daily target is critical. And do, as Annelise says, have backup process for your EVDS system if that goes down. And we found rostering a really good idea. And that's all for me.
Fabulous, Catherine. Thanks so much. We are now in that going forward time where I'm going to ask the participants, the 3 people that have already spoken, plus, let me just get my screen organized, plus Jenny Kutsia and Minja Milovanovic. Jenny, as you see, is the founder of African Potential Foundation, a health consultancy. She's got an awesome track record in research. Minja Milovanovic is the managing director of the African Potential Foundation, and also heavily involved in research and this program. So perhaps, I don't know who will, Jenny, perhaps you're the right person to give us some sense of what lies ahead in the vaccination program in South Africa.
Hi, thanks so much. So I think what lies ahead is really the ability for South Africa to adapt and become incredibly flexible as we go through this process of vaccinating. We need to rapidly learn around mistakes that are made. We are going to need to have mop-up strategies. As was suggested, you get to lunchtime or the end of the day, and there's a lull in the number of people, and you've focused so heavily on pumping vaccine through the system and getting as many drawn, then you get to the end of the day and you're finding that you need to quickly call people in. So I think that as we move into kind of, once we've got through a phase 1 and we're heading towards a phase 2 and a phase 3 of rollout, that's going to be particularly important, especially in a vaccine that, like the Johnson's & Johnson's, that has very strong sort of cold storage, cold chain issues. So I think that's really important. And then I think it's about using this current J&J trial really as a pilot for what would a national rollout look like. And what we can see is that it is cumbersome. There are opportunities for quite a lot of bottlenecks in various different places in this process. And it's resource heavy.
And collaboration.
And
collaboration.
Yeah, so it's resource and collaboration heavy. So, I mean, I'm very, very pro collaboration, don't get me wrong, but it does require quite intensive collaborations that have been very rapidly put together. And at times with everyone's aiming towards the same goal, but at times we want to get there in different ways. And so you've got to be very, very careful to not overtake on a site and to not try and sort of dictate how things are done, but to rather give information and allow sites to decide how they can do things. In terms of becoming resource heavy, having the EVDS system is in some ways a blessing in terms of knowing who can and can't to some degree be vaccinated. In other ways, it makes things very difficult in that you've got an online form that you've got to complete. And to roll it out to 40 million people means that we need a lot of people filling in forms onto the EVDS system, and we need to really consider what's practical in order to roll out. And I think we need to start thinking outside the box in terms of how we would do this. Would it happen within a healthcare space, or is there scope for us to start moving into, outside of like pharmacies, to even start saying, well, do we put an enrolled nurse into every PEP store? And, PEP is able to issue vaccine once we've got to a point where we've got a vaccine that's more stable and easier to distribute. And then we're going to need to consider issues like a second dose. If it is as AstraZeneca was, it's 2 doses. We've got to get people back, and that's quite a big thing. So I think that there are a lot of challenges. Equally, those bring a lot of opportunities. And at the moment, we're in a learning phase, so the learning curve is very, very steep. And and I think that what's been done by Desmond Tutu Foundation, the MRC, PHRU, various other organizations to ensure that we're able to roll this out as rapidly as we can, as well as the partnerships with DOH on the ground and the different provinces is, can be lauded. But I don't think that we're going to get to 40 million doses by the end of the year at the current rate that we're going. And we are going to have to change things up in order to do it faster.
Thanks, Jenny. Catherine, I wonder if you can give us some insight about the way in which having to treat the current batch of vaccines as a research trial will compare with having a fully authorized vaccine in the country.
So, well, there are 2 things that I can see immediately. One is that I saw the comment in the chat on the 2-hour time from drawing up to delivering, that's keeping it at 8 to 25 degrees. The newer product that is being made for release has a number of advantages. One, it is a single dose vial with a little bit of excess, so it's easier to draw up. We're using a multi-dose vial with no excess, so it's very fiddly to get the last dose out, so it'll be quicker from a drawing up point of view. Secondly, I think the expiry time from fridge to arm can be 4 hours, 4 hours, not 2 hours. And the third thing is the whole research piece essentially falls away, and it would be available like any other product that is dispensed at a pharmacy. So it could be rolled out at Click stores and PEP and various other places after that. As long again, and I mean, this is a vaccine like any other vaccine, so there is a tiny risk of a serious reaction or anaphylaxis. I think in the whole Toolkit program so far, and I'm not sure how many doses have been delivered, but there's been at least 6,000 just at Cretascure, and across the whole country they've had, I think, 4 serious events, and a serious event in research terms means someone has been admitted to hospital. So one of them I know is anaphylaxis, someone else had shortness of breath, which hasn't been officially diagnosed as anything, but you know, there've been few serious events, but they do happen. And when you're vaccinating a whole country, the numbers that we need to vaccinate over a period of time, we are going to see those. And so the places that they're delivered do need to be able to manage that kind of emergency situation. But you know, we should be able to speed this up a lot more rapidly if it's not under research conditions.
Thank you. Any other comments from the panel about your fears or your hopes for going forward? Okay, if not, I'm going to share my screen and we'll move into what I've always felt is the core of this presentation. I think what we've seen thus far is that there've been near heroic efforts by a whole lot of people who've got other jobs to utilize the doses that were made available by J&J, massive adjustment from a 2-dose vaccine to the single-dose vaccine, obviously making it a lot simpler. But we've got a long way to go before we've reached the 40 million. So my own sense is that the supply chain and continuous improvement folk in this country may well have a role. And it would be really so advantageous if we could find a way of matching those people with this process going forward. So where this started for me was the UK's Daily Mail online had an article on 9th of January reporting that at a mass vaccination center, they were planning to do 4 jabs a minute with 6 queues operating in parallel. Now that works out to be 90 seconds per jab. So we need to do 40 million individuals, some of whom will need the double jab. So what are the supply chain implications? What are the process design implications and challenges? What are the process stabilization challenges? You know, as we all know, stabilization is the first step towards improving, and then finally the improvement process. So we've got national distribution and mass production. So just using some lean calculations, if you'll allow me, the takt time calculation, which indicates the rhythm at which a system needs to work, looks at the available working time divided by the number of jabs in that time. So if we looked at 9 months, 25 days a month, 8 hours a day, that gives us about 6.5 million seconds to the end of the year. The number of jabs we need to do is 64 million jabs. So that's every 10th of a second, we need to be jabbing somebody. Now, if we're able to do jabs at 90 seconds, we would need 900 sites. But depending on where you are, current rates can be 10 to 15 minutes. And if we allow a buffer of 35% to allow for all sorts of contingencies, we get up to 10,000 sites. So you'll see that this is a massive challenge. And the government has got all sorts of people involved in planning this, including the military, learning from sites overseas. But how can we help? What skills are needed? I really now want to hand over to everybody on this call about thoughts of how these sites can be set up all over the country, stabilized, improved, staff not exhausted, the experience of the individual being a positive one, therefore the word gets out, this is a walk in the park, go and get yourself vaccinated. So, what do we say? What's the chat line saying?
So Norman, it's Jen here. Can I go
Hi,
ahead?
Jen. Yes, please.
Hi. So the thought that Minya and I have is that what we really need is a toolkit. We need to know that someone is going to be issued with, you know, the number of screws they need, the spanner, you know, and a map of exactly how it works. And obviously it's got to be flexible to the contextual dynamics. But in essence, there needs to be a toolkit from which guys can draw that we developed during this first sort of 500,000 doses to inform how we roll this out going forward. And so that we can really look at kind of process optimization and look at points at which we can access people in ways that don't necessarily require that they take many more hours out of their day to go and sit at a clinic that's already overburdened and where people are probably afraid to go. So that's kind of my first thought. My second thought that for me really occurred when sitting on the site particularly at Barra and experiencing this for myself was that there's quite an emotional aspect. So when you speak about having a good experience at a site, there's an emotional component to, at the end of 12 months being, you know, hiding indoors and avoiding crowded spaces, to suddenly having this bit of hope injected into your arm that, oh, okay, like maybe now it's going to be all right. And we're going to get through this. And maybe, you know, by the end of this year, we'll all be able to go back to some semblance of normalcy. And I think it's also about just, you know, when we speak about the burnout of staff, part of what we saw on the site on the different sites for the last 2 weeks is having to hold emotional space for people as well. So it wasn't just about the pragmatics of staff working very hard, very long, 13, 14-hour days to make this happen and still trying to get their day jobs done over and above that. It was also the emotional space that everybody had to hold on that site for everybody else. The trauma kind of that's been created through this pandemic that we all, there's an exhale that happens, and we have to be very cognizant of that for staff on the site.
And sorry, just on what I think Garth, do I have the correct name, that was presenting on doing the educational program in the hospital? I think we need to start thinking outside of the hospital and healthcare setting now. Obviously, we all talk about it, but I really do think there's a lot of room to sit down and start having these discussions and conversations with other individuals. We all know that vaccine hesitancy is very high, and it's great to have a toolkit that you can go and implement across different sites. But if you don't have people coming and taking it up, it's all just wasted resources.
Yeah, good points, good points.
I completely concur with that, and that was going to be one of my suggestions as well, is to think out how we can actually get information to South Africans, you know, in a tangible way that, you know, what Garth was speaking about, you know, in terms of digesting the information, etc., that when people arrive, they're ready to go, you know, so, you know, we're on the starting line, we're ready to go.
And Jenny, when you talk about holding the emotional space for everyone, you mean everyone, the people coming to be vaccinated and the staff working under those pressured conditions?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing that we saw on the site was that the way that, in particular the Barra site, we spent an extensive amount of time there. And the volunteers were often medical staff coming out of the hospital to volunteer on the site and assist. And many of these guys have been working in COVID wards, particularly obviously when we've hit big waves, you know, it's all hands on deck. And there's a trauma that comes with that. And so one of the things that we saw was that guys were really, there was a massive release that happened around being able to, one, access a vaccine. There's a desperation at times. You know, at the moment we've got massive demand and we can't meet the demand for product. You know, we don't have enough product for the demand of vaccine, but that will turn. At some point, we're going to get past all the early adopters and the people who see the intensive value. It wasn't like that initially for the first few days. And then there was kind of a turning point. And so you've got a motion of people coming out of COVID wards that are exhausted from that, and that really need support kind of in that, and are now trying to manage the vaccine side, and they're emotionally very vested in what they're doing, more so than they necessarily would be in their general day job. You know, they're really passionate and they're really giving them themselves. And then you've got the emotional kind of release of trauma from the last 12 months of having to care for people, of having to, you know, really give up part of your life to kind of do this. And I imagine for the average South African as well, there's, you know, all of us have experienced a degree of trauma in this sort of physical isolation we're having in going through this, the COVID lockdowns and being off-site and away from people. And so, I mean, I know from my perspective, I found myself crying when I got into the queue, and I just hadn't expected it. And I do patient face through a lot of the research that I do, and you know, and with going to all of the sites, our risk is quite high. And I found myself incredibly emotional at being able to get a vaccine, which was something that I absolutely didn't expect. And I know that I'm not the only person. I mean, we saw it quite a lot. We saw some of the teams, the research team sort of breaking down at seeing it coming to life, you know, the work that they've done coming to life and the hope that's being given. And we saw, you know, healthcare workers, both who were being vaccinated and who were vaccinating, particularly on those first few days, sort of just the emotion, the raw emotion of doing it. And I think that it is, I think that we have to, that's part of kind of where people will burn out, is that, you know, there's a lot of projection and internalization that's going to take place on these sites without people realizing it. So you're going to have guys coming to the site desperate for the vaccine, rife with fear, and they're going to exhale that. And we just need to be cognizant of that on our sites, and cognizant of the burden that unconsciously we take on, and that staff on the sites will be taking on. That was definitely my sort of observation of the dynamic on sites.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. That's, I think you've communicated the emotions very well, and a good reminder, especially to us who are in the continuous improvement industrial engineering space, where we don't necessarily take the human emotion into account. Catherine, I'm interested in your post that everyone needs a photograph.
Well, as Jenny says, this is an exciting moment for people, you know, and so it's often the administrator's role. They're kind of typing in EVDS and holding the phone, taking multiple snaps of people with the needle in their arm. I mean, people are genuinely relieved and excited to get there. And conversely, when the queues, you know, when the queues are excessive and you're not on the list, there's that anxiety and anger that you're not able to get it. So that the staff at the centre are not only managing the positive emotions of the people that are getting vaccines, but the negative emotions of those who aren't going to get it in this first round, you know, because, you know, more vaccines are coming, but this round is very limited. So there's all of that to deal with, which is hard.
Yeah, it was interesting this morning observing at Tygerberg Hospital. I was called over by a nurse who was about to be jabbed, and she handed me her phone and said, "I want a photograph."
It's your job.
But also, Jenny, following up on the fact that so many people they've got other jobs, Catherine and her team as well. A senior sister at Tygerberg this morning said that she had been at work at 5 this morning to get her normal job going, and was now giving injections. And I could see that she was so committed to this whole process that she was involved well beyond simply doing injections. I think we're, Garth, do you want to add anything about informing people, the training as we go forward?
Good day, Norman. Yeah, so what we did, we actually challenging the social media. So all our people that's getting vaccinated, we asked them to do a little peace sign V for vaccinated, and we post it in social media. We are in collaboration with the UCT's marketing manager to actually put it up on their Facebook page, and we're actually extending it to UCT because that's where our current need is. Our staff is covered in terms of information, now the students are the need. So I'm just thinking, while everybody was talking, can't we use the same people that manages the voting in South Africa, then we can get everybody to go through the vaccines quite quickly.
What an excellent idea.
Yeah.
The polling stations become vaccination stations.
Yeah.
And Annelies, I'm very conscious of the fact that I pushed you at the end. And I think you had more to say. And in that you were so involved in the infrastructure and the setting up, perhaps you've got something to say now.
No, you killed me.
Is that a dry cough you've got?
No.
But Annelies, and it must be a very big logistics exercise as we roll this out. The stages that we're going to go through, whether sites are issuing a single dose vaccine or a double dose vaccine. I sat in on an international webinar. I think it was on Monday night. In the US, someone operating 5 sites in Texas, talking about a system, a tool that they have developed for scheduling, for tracking, for staffing, and they're going to share that tool, plus the recording of that webinar. So I think we're going to find there is learning from elsewhere in the world, and hopefully people are developing tools. And Jenny, I hope that we're able to learn from kits that are put together in other countries. But I don't know who's at the head of this thing, but they must be very busy people trying to keep track of local and international experiences as we move forward to try to vaccinate 40 million people. Questions from out there? Jenny and Sonia, I don't know if you want to pick questions off the chat line.
There's lots of interesting comments and things coming through. There's talk about a vaccination station in a stadium and having paramedics for emergency response. I don't know what the thinking is on something like that. Is that feasible?
No, it was interesting. In Texas, they had 2 drive-through units. So you pitch up in your motor car and you stay in your motor car.
Okay.
And Jenny, I think I've heard you talking about Ian Hanke, is it, who's planning mobile units in this country?
Yeah, so Ian Sanne, I believe, is putting together mobile units that will be able to go out and vaccinate. You know, if I think back to your comment that we need 10,000 vaccination sites to be able to achieve the target, if I look at, it looks sort of like you'd need about 40,000 vaccines done per site. And if I look at Barra alone, we were able to do 2,000 in a day. You know, so I think when you've got a vaccine site, a site with sufficient infrastructure, and that was 2,000 under quite strange conditions. You know, it's under vaccine protocol conditions, and not just a normal rollout. You know, of an over-the-counter product. So yeah, I think that I think that it is possible. It's going to require a huge effort. You know, we've got to be very careful of stadiums and just kind of our ability to control massive crowds of people moving through, and the cost implications of that. And I think there's opportunities to potentially create employment for the hundreds of thousands of, I'm sure, enrolled nurses in the country who have, you know, sufficient training to be able to stick a needle in an arm, and be able to then support with vaccination. Yeah. But no, I think there's also space for public-private partnerships, which really need to be looked at and need to be embraced. And if we consider just kind of the rate of employment, you know, if we could have employers coming on board to help with rollout within their businesses, that'll take, you know, not a huge amount, but it will take some of the burden off the public sector to then roll out to the rest of the country.
Minja, I know that you have a health psychology background, and we haven't heard from you. Any input from you at this stage?
Am I?
Yeah, you're unmuted.
So for me, it was actually quite interesting. I wanted to understand what the private sector was doing differently from the public sector, and I went to one of the private sites today. And they have different challenges, but their setup that I went to view, obviously when resources are not a limitation, and when I say resources, I'm talking about personnel, and I'm talking about obviously the consumables. So it's quite mind-blowing to see what can be put together and the numbers that can be done in a single hour. So the whole public-private collaboration resonates quite strongly with me, especially under controlled circumstances, before we get to the point where we're talking about rolling it out at a Clicks or a Discem or even like a mobile site. So, what would that look like on a bigger scale? Because I know that private is given a very small percentage of the vaccinations, but well, not very small, a smaller percentage of the vaccination, but they have the potential to be catering to a big public portion, which, as Jen mentioned, can take a lot of pressure off. So that's just something that I'm toying with at the moment. And if we think about resources, for the current phase, we need our sites to have internet. We need our sites to have electricity. And the site that I saw this morning is considered an island site, and everything can go offline and it'll still function, and it could still distribute vaccinations. So,
wow, thanks very much for that. That's a lovely additional insight for this webinar. Thanks, Minja.
Absolutely.
We've come to the 60-minute period, which we agreed was the time for this. And certainly our panelists are so up to their ears in running these sites and planning new sites that I do realize that some of you will have to bail out right now. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for making this time available, and for your preparation and your delivery. I'm sure that all of us really appreciate that and wish you strength and resilience as you continue this challenging role in the campaign. There are those of us who are able to stay on. If there are further questions, we'll do so. But thank you very much, panelists.
Definitely concur from our side, from a SAPEX point of view. Fascinating information, and I think it raises a lot of other issues as well that need to be given some consideration. One of the things that's come up here is the handling of the waste of the vials, syringes, needles, and the like. I mean, surely that's going to create another problem. You know, the elimination of waste, where's that going? That's another massive amount of waste that needs to find a home somewhere. And then talking about making sure that counterfeit products are avoided. I mean, we know that counterfeit products in the public health space definitely are a big problem. And I mean, is this something that we may encounter?
So can I respond to the issue of counterfeit products?
Sure, please.
Yeah, so I think what's really important is to understand the amount of security following this product through its sort of lifespan as it gets to us. And again, I'm just going to refer back to the sites that I've seen where pharmacy is escorted by security. And if the pharmacist is, more than a couple of steps away from the actual site, in some cases they're in a vehicle with security in the vehicle.
Wow.
And yeah, so basically you've got, like a pharmacist that's got to accompany that vaccine and then sign it over and hand it over, to the site. So there's very strong oversight and security around this precious commodity at the moment. And I'm sure that is going to remain the case. I mean, that said, I'm not naive to think that there won't be counterfeit products that will pop up. We know that there's already been, a couple of arrests with guys that had a store, a house full of whether it was real vaccine or counterfeit, I'm not sure. Quite a scary thought. But equally so, one of the other problems is guys going on and registering as healthcare professionals when they aren't. So Joe Blogs could go on and fake that he's a healthcare professional, and we had people sharing their voucher numbers. So getting to site and getting to the point where they're about to be vaccinated, and then it turns out that their voucher number's actually already been used. And it wasn't their voucher number, they got it from someone else. So just kind of blatant lying and trying to scam the system. So there are going to be issues like this, and I think it's about understanding them and then putting in place processes that allow you to weed those things out, to pick people up sooner than once they're in your vaccine site, as not belonging there right now.
And also ensure that you have the correct information on the ground, going to the general public, informing them about potential counterfeit products and what it would actually look like. I'm not so much worried about the counterfeit products making their way into the general hospital setting, especially in the current phase, but more when we start talking about big rollouts on a national level.
Yeah.
And then
bigger numbers.
Yeah, and then I mean, from a climate perspective, I agree that this does just create kind of, more waste as humans, as a species that we create. But effectively, it is treated as medical waste, and it's disposed of appropriately in line with that, to the best of my knowledge. I'm sure that Catherine would be better positioned possibly to comment on that from the Desmond Tutu side, as head of the CRS there. But I think she might have dropped off. I'm not seeing her on anymore.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have a look. Is there a specific plan for the rollout with large employer organizations such as the mines? If we could hand that over and give some responsibility or accountability for the big organizations, that might take a bit of pressure off. Is that even feasible?
So I completely agree. And I think that, the mines is a really nice example, because if we look at kind of during the earlier sort of HIV/AIDS days, and even now they have very good health protocols in place and health infrastructure. So I think that from that perspective, it's very realistic to think that you will be able to get them to help. Certainly for their staff, but hopefully also for surrounding communities. I think there's an awesome opportunity there to be able to serve the communities, that staff your mine, or whose family staff your mine. So I do think that there's opportunities for that. I know that there are discussions taking place amongst multiple corporates, from banks through to our pharmacy chains, looking at how they can get involved, and how they can support this, and particularly for their staff. And I know that there are discussions that are taking place around what this would look like and how it would happen. Again, I think that there's a huge amount of learning that's still taking place in this first phase. And obviously, as we learn, it becomes an easier journey. And as we have new generation and more stable products becoming available, again, it becomes an easier journey to roll out. So I have no doubt that these corporates are going to rise to the occasion. It's about getting everyone to do it. Everyone to own their share of responsibility in creating a safer world, and one that can become more economically viable again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny. Louise, you have your hand up.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. I want to speak from a vaccinator and a coordinator of vaccinators perspective. I think much of the stress regarding the EVDS can be relieved on site if we can have easier access to the EVDS help desk. If we can't choose a facility, we cannot really capture there. And it is usually the vaccinators almost have a last minute knowledge that they have to be at a specific site. And when we actually created the accounts initially, we just linked it to one site, and now they have to be accessible to different sites, and it really causes a lot of stress. For example, this morning at Gatesville, they reverted back to papers, which is such a schlep eventually, and it also skews the figures eventually. So if that could be possible, it would really help. Thank you.
Thank you. I will flag that for the guys that are managing EVDS, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's just insanely frustrating not having access into the system. You know, when guys arrive and they've registered and they haven't yet received a voucher number, or they've updated and the system hasn't updated. I know how frustrating that is. And I know that they are going to be starting to roll out online scheduling that will take place and be managed through EVDS for about 2/3 of people going to each site, and 1/3 will kind of be the mop up for whatever doesn't arrive. But I mean, I share your frustration on that one.
I mean, is everybody happy to just talk through another few questions or points? Here's a question: can vaccination to an extent be integrated into routine care processes, chronic diseases, or does it have to have a dedicated specialized unit? So I suppose that's looking forward. Is it some way that we can kind of double up by integrating in those processes?
So you happy for me to field it? Guys, I'm very noisy, so if somebody else wants to field it, go ahead and take it. But no, absolutely. I think that it can definitely be an integrated service, and I think it needs to be long-term. At the moment, because we have such a limited number of doses coming in, we really need to focus on our frontline healthcare staff that are dealing directly with COVID patients. But I think going forward, it is certainly going to need to become a much more integrated service. But even if you integrate, if you just consider that, your average person that gets to a clinic, many clinics are overburdened by needing to provide various chronic medication. So somebody could arrive at the clinic and they have to get there at 4 a.m. and they wait there, and at 10 a.m. the gates get closed and they get told, sorry, we're not actually going to be able to see anymore. We've taken the max we can see for the day, and you still only finish your clinic visit, at sort of 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And so when we consider that, there needs to be a dual approach, that we need to have stuff integrated, that you can, when you go to get your diabetes meds, you get your jab. And equally, we need to have an approach where we potentially set up vaccination sites alongside our grant queues. We have, vaccination sites at month, across the month at local PEP or local spas in small towns in the middle of nowhere. So there's going to have to be a blended approach. I don't think that we can do this with just a kind of one size fits all approach.
Thank you, Jenny. And no, you're not too loud. There's another comment here about having a checklist. Sounds very simple for such a complex problem. But basically, there is a book by, is it Atul Gawande's Checklist Manifesto. He speaks about the fact that doctors in theatres tend to make life-threatening errors when they neglect or forget about the basics. So therefore, in this case, a basic checklist may be at the very least prevent minor errors and reduce the efficiency of the process. So, I mean, we hear about people in theatre that have had scissors left behind. I mean, I know that's a that's a far and few between example, but you know, a checklist for most things is not a bad thing to have. And Annaliese's hand up here, so I don't know if that's in response to this question, Annalise.
Actually, not in response to that question,
Okay.
but in response to some of the things that has been mentioned of the areas where people want to implement vaccination stations. The main thing that need to be kept in mind is that computer equipment is essential. Otherwise, the vaccinees are not going to get their SMS to say that they've been vaccinated and what their vaccination number is. And I think in future that is going to be important for people who want to travel. So whenever you think about grant payouts and whatever that you would like to do there, it can work, but there must be computer equipment available for administrators, maybe not for administrators so much, but for the vaccinators, and if they can have an assistant to assist them, like we did here at Grooteskier. But because most of the stuff that the administrators check can also be checked by the vaccinators. So a vaccinator can have a dual role of doing the admin check as well as the vaccination check in. But I think that is one of the things that need to be taken into account. So if you are at Pitzonnewater and you haven't got Wi-Fi access and you haven't got computer access, it's going to be extremely difficult to do it from the post office or from wherever you would like to do it, where the grants are being paid out.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that one of the things that they need to have is some sort of an offline system for EBDS, that you can load the vouchers for the day that you're meant to be, you're meant to be vaccinating, and then you can go to your place where there's no Wi-Fi. And I agree. I mean, I think that it is a resource intense process. You can't expect a nurse to be capturing all this data and vaccinating a person every 10 seconds. It's not going to happen. So you do need to have administrators there and available to support that. And ideally, you want to be doing live capturing, which is what we've seen at the private sector. And they really are able to then streamline their processes by doing that. And we're big proponents of that. I think it's just about getting to the point where government understands some of the needs, which again comes back to putting the toolkit together adapted for South Africa. So what does the South African toolkit for rolling out a mass vaccine program look like in record time?
I don't think that the private sector has actually started to vaccinate except yesterday or Monday when they were given the go ahead by doing it. But we here at Grooteskier do capture live. So when you leave the vaccination station, you get your SMS to say that you've been vaccinated and this is your vaccine number.
No, it's brilliant. So in fact, in collaboration with BARA, the private sector did start just over a week ago. So by Friday, we had vaccinated, I think, 3,500 private sector staff. And again, they've got Mill Park. So they've moved now their center from BARA, where they had a mirror center. They've now moved to Mill Park and they are vaccinating there. So we are rolling out private sector. I think they're taking 30% of vaccinations are going into the private sector now.
Is Gary Cantor still with us? I see he's posted a very interesting comment, a very interesting question. Gary, are you with us? No, I saw him giving thanks, sort of indicating that he left. But he says here that in the US, using stadiums, they're achieving 1,500 vaccinations per hour. Just extraordinary. And then he asks, what is the staffing number at the GSH or Tygerberg venues in relation to the number of vaccinations done? Well, certainly what I've seen recently is as we are having to issue the vaccines in more limited numbers because there's a bit of a shortage, it's difficult to assess whether we're over-resourced or under-resourced, but it's a very important question if one looks at the cost of the total rollout. Mm-hmm. That what with checklists and carefully planned toolkits for various sized facilities, simply the efficiency is going to be very important to the total cost. Certainly like to talk to Gary a bit more about his insights.
And my sense is that at the moment we are massively overinvested in terms of human capital, but that it's a factor of it being still part of a trial. So you've kind of got a lot of duplication of roles. And then I also think because we've got a lot of volunteer staff working on sites, we have, you know, you've got clinicians directing people as opposed to, you know, kind of somebody that's lesser qualified. You know, or that is qualified to direct someone and not needing to be in surgery. So I think that, you know, as we get further into this and things sort of settle down and we get a more structured rollout plan and we get, you know, and kind of the different provincial departments come on board, I think that we'll start kind of balancing out in terms of human resource investment.
Yeah, I think for any outsider looking at the current system, they would see all sorts of inefficiencies and wastes and workarounds. But the mere fact that these centers have got up to the rates of vaccination that they have in such a short period of time, to me is quite extraordinary. In industrial engineering and operations terms, one then has to move to stabilizing and then standardizing, and out of that comes replication.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have a question quickly. So I know that you get a vaccination number. So I've heard a lot of information coming out of Australia about how you have to have the vaccination number before you can go anywhere, before you can travel. How do they link that to your direct ID? Do you just refer to that vaccination number? Is it going to be linked on a central database? I mean, if you're booking for travel, are they going to want to check that you've got a vaccination number? I think these are the type of things. I mean, they're simple enough questions, but you know, the general public, if they're already terrified of this vaccination, you know, these are the other sorts of things that they're going to want answers to.
So I'm not sure exactly how it's working internationally. I've been so involved on the ground here that I haven't had a moment to breathe in. But what I can certainly say is the way that you register on the current electronic vaccine database system is that you put your ID number in. And everything is linked back to your ID. So it's your ID, and then obviously you've got to put in the correct cell phone number to get your voucher number. Yeah, and it's ID or passport number. And everything is kind of linked through to that. So you have to be putting your ID number in at every point. And when you get this questionnaire that everyone refers to and the confirmation that you've had your vaccine, it's all linked to your ID. So it's all captured into EVDS under your ID number. So I suspect that we are going to get to a point where countries will require evidence that you have vaccinated. And I'm not convinced that a little paper vaccine card is going to be sufficient. I think that they're going to, Big Brother's watching, was almost my sense going through the EVDS system.
It's a message will get lost, phones will get broken.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. There are so many questions, and I really think that we could talk for a very, very long time. This has been an incredible presentation, very interesting. I think it's given us lots of things to think about. It is so impressive, the work that's been done thus far. To all you guys that are involved, for managing to get this up and going and working. And it doesn't have to be in its perfect state. You know, everything improves and evolves as we go along. But it's incredible, and kudos to all of you for managing to do this. I mean, the turnaround time, trying to educate people, getting processes in place has been no easy feat. So well done to all of you. I'm going to put Norman and the rest of the panelists on the spot now. There's a lot of interest in pursuing this discussion further in its current form, and maybe an update as to where we are later on in the year as we roll out more. So is this something that we could include in the SAPEX conference program so that we can share this and have people look forward to it, because I think it's really, really, it's not just interesting, but in terms of processes, procedures, how the supply chain is impacted, and all those sorts of things. It provides really good insight and food for thought.
Well, Tanya, one of the messages, very strong message out of this webinar, is the need for communication. And communication with the general public to overcome any hesitancy people have. There's lots of research to show that when people understand where to get whatever they're looking for and the process they're going to go through, they become much more willing to be involved, and the uptake is much greater. So communication with the general public, communication with the supply chain and improvement community, I think is also really important. So if you guys can include something in the SAPIEX conference, I think that's very good. I suspect Jenny would be a good speaker. Jenny, how about that?
Well volunteered.
I'm going to volunteer her on, she's just stepped out of the room momentarily. So I would volunteer.
Well done, Minja. Yeah. Okay. Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Sonia, if I can just add my thanks. We've had an awesome team. Annalise and Garth and Catherine and Jenny and Minja. An awesome team giving us an insight into what they're currently so involved in, and the really good progress that is being made, the challenges that lie ahead. We just say a big thank you to them. And thank you all who've come in on this webinar. I hope that it's been valuable to you. If you want to get your name on a list to maybe be involved in some way, either communicate with SAPIEX or the Lean Institute. And then I also want to thank SAPIEX and the Lean Institute for setting this up, for taking the initiative to make it happen. So thanks all round.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you for your team and the insights. Thank you all for being here with us this afternoon, and obviously supporting the SAPIEX and the Lean communities. And we will look forward to further discussions on this particular topic. And I saw Jenny's mute went off again there, so I'm just wondering if she wants to add something else.
Yeah. Now, I was also going to say, Jenny's going to talk. Wow, okay.
Alan, don't be cheeky.
I've come back. I can hear you now.
Good.
Okay, bye everyone. It's been great to be involved with you this afternoon. Take care, all of you. Go well.
Super. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Cheers, cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.